begin a new sermon series today, we're going to be talking about the foundation of our lives. And it's important to understand that, as we spoke about just a second ago during communion, that there are a lot of people out there who will happily try to help you to find a foundation for your life. Sometimes they will do that just out of the kindness of their hearts. Now, sometimes they're willing to do that for $19.95. There's always a catch, right? And the thing is that there's all kinds of relationship coaches and life coaches and all. There's a whole industry now that's based around lifestyle. There's all kinds of supplements and exercise regimens and schedules, and there's no end of the advice that you can find on how to live a good life. But really, in the midst of all of that, what is the firm foundation for our life? What can we really be certain of, and what can we build our life on? And the reality is that our relationship with God is the only thing that can provide that foundation. It's the starting point for everything that we do. And so we're going to be talking over the next few weeks about how our relationship with God transforms our life. Because one of the problems that we tend to have as American Christians is we hold on to certain truths of the Bible, or we go to church a certain number of times a month, or we do certain things, but the problem is that really forming our life based on our relationship with God is quite an expansive thing. It will require everything in us. It will require us to kind of strip everything away and build from the ground up. And so that's what we're going to be looking at over the next few weeks. If you want to turn to Matthew chapter 7, we're going to be in verse 24 through 27. And in this passage, Jesus is saying something that's very important and very profound, and it's a passage that all of us probably heard from the time we were in Sunday school, and so it's very familiar to us. But let's go ahead and read it. Chapter 7, starting in verse 24, it says, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it." You see, it's one thing to understand who Jesus is. It's one thing to kind of be familiar with the Bible and know some scriptures. It's another thing to anchor your life on the person of Jesus Christ and your relationship with Him. And so as we look at this today, what we're going to see is that the first aspect of our lives being founded on Him is that really what happens is that the covenant relationship that we have with Christ is the foundation for all of our relationships. There's a lot of different aspects of our life, but the first one we want to talk about today is the foundation of all of our relationships. And so we're going to look at that in three different ways today. We're going to talk about the foundation of covenant. We're going to talk about the strength of covenant, and we're going to talk about a life of covenant. And so as we look at this, let's first talk about the foundation of covenant. So I've said that our relationship with Jesus is the foundation of our life. And then I started switching and talking about covenant, and that was purposeful. Because one of the problems that we first run into is that if you've heard people talk about, do you have a relationship with Christ, or have you heard of Christ, and have you met Him, do you know Him? The problem is that what kind of context do you put that in? Because the issue that we kind of run into is that it's really easy to talk about a relationship with God, but it's very difficult to understand what that means. What does a relationship with God look like? What does a relationship with Christ look like? Why is that so difficult? Well, because when you talk about a relationship with a person, when you're talking about a relationship to your wife or a relationship with kids, there's an actual individual there who's with you, and you can tell whether that's going well or not, right? I mean, how many of you guys have ever been on a first date? Anyone here ever been on a first date? Can you tell whether that's going well or not? Usually you can, right? Sometimes it's very obvious, especially if it's going poorly. It can be very, very obvious. But the reality is that, we get cues from the other person all the time. Like we become good as human beings at reading the faces of people. In fact, you can go to a restaurant and have a waitress or a waiter, and you can kind of joke with them, and you can tell by their facial expressions whether you're doing well or whether you're doing poorly. Even on something so small as an interaction with the clerk at the gas station, you're getting feedback on how that relationship is going. The problem is that when we talk about having a relationship with God, we don't know what context to put that in because we don't feel like we're getting feedback. We don't know what that relationship should look like. We don't know what it should entail. We don't know how that should go. But the great thing is that God has actually helped us out with that by creating this concept that's in the Bible called covenant. And when we understand covenant, it provides a framework, it provides a way of understanding our relationship with God. And so we're going to talk right now about the foundation of covenant because it is the foundation of our life and the foundation of all of our other relationships. Now, what's fascinating here is that in Matthew chapter 7, if you have a Bible handy or if you're on your phone, if you want to look at that again real quick, if you notice in verse 24, it starts off, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man. And so we might think that the whole idea here is just listening to the words of God and doing them, listening to the words of Jesus and doing them. But what's interesting is the context of this passage. If you go back up to the next section, or the earlier section, go back up to the earlier section. It starts in verse 21. Do you guys see that? Matthew chapter 7, verse 21. Let's read that section that precedes this one. It says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven." You see, here's the thing, is that Jesus talks about putting his words into practice, but now he's going to, before this, he's going to put those ideas into context. And the context is really interesting. Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' is going to enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, 'Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do mighty works in your name?' And then will I declare to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness.'" It's really interesting, isn't it, that Jesus precedes this section about putting his words into practice with something about relationship, saying he will say to some people, "I never knew you." You see, our obedience fits into the context of relationship. Our obedience fits into the context of covenant. Covenant is the way of relationship with God. So what is a covenant? It's kind of like a contract, but not exactly. Now, it sounds strange to us to think of relationships in terms of a contract, right? You don't go, it's your first date, and you have them sign a contract. You say, "On this first date, I will avoid talking about politics, religion. Things I will talk about is how many pets do you have?" You don't sign a contract. You don't say, "On this first date, who's getting the check? Sign here for, that way you make sure that they don't, dine and dash on you because you have it in the contract. They promise to pay." And so it seems weird to talk about a relationship in terms of a covenant, which is like a contract, but it's more than a contract. You see, it's easy to think about our relationship with God as kind of doing whatever we want and just being supported by him, because that's sometimes the way we think of relationships, right? A relationship gives me the freedom to do whatever I want, and they just support me along the way. Well, that's not what it means to have a relationship with God. It's not. When you enter into a covenant relationship with God, there's an exchange that's going on. And that exchange is total and complete. God is giving you all of himself, and you are giving him all of yourself. That's what it means to have a covenant. That's a relationship with God. And that's the only firm foundation for you to build your life on. When you give God everything that you have because you're certain that he's giving you everything that he has. And when these two parties come together, you and God, and there's an exchange made of everything, something new is created. The way that the Bible illustrates that is with the family, that if you have a husband and you have a wife and they come together and they exchange everything, you end up with something new. You end up with a child. That is the understanding, that is the physical manifestation, the way to understand this. That when you are in a covenant relationship, that relationship that you have is something new, and it creates something new out of you. It's easy to understand this in certain ways. Think about it this way. Now, how many of you guys have ever joined a sports team? Okay, you joined a sports team when you were young, right? And with me, it was Little League. I was in Little League. I wasn't very good at Little League. It was not great. I'll admit that when I was in Little League, I was probably the worst player on our team. I was the absolute worst player. But the great thing was we had a wonderful coach, and we had a great group of guys, and some of them were really good. And my first year in Little League, it was amazing. I was just the worst kid out there, just terrible. They put me in right field or left field. Which is the one where you put the people who aren't very good? Not to impugn anybody here. It's where I would play if I was still playing. But here's the thing, it's like that's where they put me. And I still found ways to mess it up over and over and over again. But you know what? I have a picture, and in this picture, and somewhere in my house, I think, in this picture is a picture of us, my team, and we are holding up the championship trophy. I was the worst kid. I was probably the worst kid in the league. And yet, I had a championship trophy. Why? Because I had the jersey of the winning team. I had the identity of the team that won. You see, let me say this, what I had to give was not a lot. And sometimes it was even counterproductive. But I gave everything that I had to my team, and they gave everything to me. And I was not just me when I was in Little League. I had the identity of our team. Our team was created by each of those people giving everything that they had. And when they came together, that relationship that we had created this new identity of this team. And I was a new person. I was a champion. I was a winner. Even though I was the most terrible player ever. You see, that's the way that it works when we have a relationship. You know what happens is you become not just yourself when you enter into a covenant relationship with God. You become a son of God. You become a daughter of God. You become a child of God. The old has gone and the new has come. You're not you as an individual any longer. Do you understand? Something new has been created because you have this new identity that's been formed because of this relationship with God. When you give Him everything and He gives you everything, you have a new identity, something that is founded in eternity and something that cannot be taken. I was listening to or watching a fail video. Have you guys seen those on YouTube? You know, there's just a list of people failing, series of videos, series of clips of people failing. And kind of like what I just did. And what was great is that there was a coach that was explaining to he had the tiny first, second, third graders, maybe tiny little league kids. And he was explaining to them, he said, you know what? You might have heard people say that it doesn't matter whether you win or lose. In fact, your father might have been one of the ones to tell you this, that it doesn't matter whether you win or lose. But I'm telling you, if your father told you this, he's a loser. It's like, wow, that was a little rough. Now, it might have been all in good fun, and I'd like to think that that's what it was. I think the coach was just having fun. But we know people who believe that, right? And here's the problem with that. Is that what happens when you join a team is there is something more important than victory, and that is fidelity to the team. Because really, what is it that you're trying to learn when you're on the team? What is it that you need to know? What is it that needs to grow inside of you? You see, here's the thing is that how many of you have ever been on a sports team and when the going got rough, when victory was not there, when defeat after defeat was what was happening, that the team members turned on each other? Have you ever experienced that? The team members turned on each other. Man, get it together. Why are you doing this? Have you seen that? Why every time? Every time. That could have been people talking to me. Every time, why do you do that? You see, here's the thing. The covenant is formed by the identity of the team. And the pursuit of victory, it does something for you. It means what's really about is it's about, can you stick together? Can you honor the covenant? Can you identify with your team in good times and in bad times? Can you uphold the covenant? Can you be, I am all for you and you guys are all for me and we're all for one another, no matter what happens? Because in a covenant, what is ultimately important is faithfulness. You see, what happened is that we were losing. And we were losers. We were sinners. And God could have said, you know what? You guys always mess up. Have you guys ever read the Old Testament? Don't you want to say, you guys always mess up? Don't you want to look at the Old Testament people and say, why do you constantly sin? Why do you constantly turn away from God? Why do you guys always mess up? Do you ever get exasperated with the Old Testament people and reading the Old Testament? Do you think God ever got exasperated with them? Do you think that God ever got exasperated with us? Do you think that God ever got exasperated with all of humanity? And yet, what happened? He stuck with us. He identified with us. In our fallen state, in our being losers, in our being lost in sin, God stuck with us. Jesus came to this earth and experienced all of the pain and suffering of a life on this earth. He ministered to us and invited us into the kingdom. He lived a perfect life of righteousness to his Father, and then he died on the cross, not for his sins, not for his losses, but for ours. What do I wish every kid learns in Little League? Is to be faithful to his team. No matter what, to be faithful to his team, to encourage his teammates, to lift them up, to stick with them no matter what happens. Because that's what it means to be in a covenant. There's a challenge of covenant, and the challenge of covenant is always the challenge to seek our good outside of the covenant. I was watching, have you guys heard of the Murdaugh murders? Or the Murdaugh murders? Have you guys heard this? There's been a big thing going on. A trial just happened. There's documentaries all over the place about this. It was a crazy story. You had this kid who was drunk driving a boat apparently and with his friends, and a girl got killed. But the lucky thing for him was he came from this very influential, very powerful family. And they were able to largely cover it up. And so 2 years later, he still hadn't really faced any trouble over this. There was a trial scheduled, but it kept not happening. And all of a sudden, there was a phone call that this kid, Paul, and his mother had been shot to death. His father was a very prominent attorney, a family of very prominent attorneys, and they had lots of power in the county that they were in. And he called 911 saying that he had found their dead bodies. Well, just this last week, he was found guilty of their murders. And if you watch the documentary, what you see is that there's this fall that happens in this family. This family is very powerful and very prominent. But in the interviews that they do, what you see happen is that there's this idea that they become untouchable, that they use their power not being connected in covenant with the community, but to seek their good away from the good of the community, that they betray the trust and they betray the power and they betray the station that they're given. And that betrayal then spreads and ultimately finds its way into the family itself, where the members of the family betray each other. You see, back in the garden, that's what happens, is that we are in a covenant relationship with God, and Satan comes to us and says, you can find your good outside of a covenant relationship with God. That's what he says to us. And because we as humanity believed him, we were the ultimate betrayers. And Jesus finds himself the night he is arrested being betrayed by Judas. Why? Because betrayal of the covenant is what we're guilty of. But faithfulness to the covenant is what Jesus has done. And he imputes his faithfulness to the covenant to us. And that is the only foundation for our lives. Let's talk about the strength of the covenant, because covenants are unbelievably strong. And that's why it's the sure foundation for our lives. Why are covenants so strong? Well, they have the strength of love behind them, which is stronger than anything that you can imagine. It's more powerful than any physical tool. And there's an example I can give of this, and it's called the mama bear phenomenon. Has anybody ever here heard of the mama bear phenomenon? The mama bear phenomenon is something that you hope never to see in action, especially if you're on the receiving end of it. What is the mama bear phenomenon? Well, here's the thing. It exists in all of the animal world. The mama bear phenomenon is that the mothers and their young, there's a covenant there. There's an identification. The mother is all for her young, and it's the most powerful thing you've seen. Let me give you the best example I can. I come to the office every day. I go usually in that west door unless I'm facing mama bear phenomenon. Then I choose any other door. Why do I go in that door down there? Well, I go in that door down there because it's the most convenient. We have a daycare here, and it avoids them and it allows them to do their thing as much as possible. But here's the thing. Occasionally, I'm an over 200-pound man, okay? Some might call me husky. Now, here's the thing. This bird, it weighs ounces. The problem is this bird makes a nest in that bush right over there by the door. And when this bird that weighs ounces makes a nest over there by the door, I do not use that door. Because that bird is nuts. That bird will kill you. That bird will dive bomb you. It will harass you. It will freak you out. I've thought about bringing a racquetball racket to put an end to the bird. But there's something in me that admires the bird. The bird is doing its job. It's protecting its young. And the thing is that I, as a 200-pound man, find myself going and using another door, saying, bird, you've got this area. It's yours. Why? Because here's the thing. When something is more important than somebody's life, you don't want to mess with that person. You don't want to mess with that animal. You don't want to mess with that thing. If there is something that's more important than its life, what are you going to do? You can't. If I showed up with a racquetball racket, that bird would still dive bomb me. Because it doesn't care. There is no penalty I can impose on that bird that will stop it from coming at me with everything that it has. Why? Because there's something more important than its own life. And I'll tell you this, when something is more important than your life, you are unstoppable. Here's the point. Covenants are incredibly powerful. Because in a covenant, there is something more important than your life. And that is why it's the only firm foundation for your life. Because when you have something that is more important than your very existence, than your earthly existence, you are unstoppable. There really isn't anything that can get you off course. There's nothing that can slow you down. There's nothing that can put you under. There's nothing that can stop you. You see, the thing is that if a relationship with Jesus is more important than your very earthly existence, there is nothing that anyone can do to you. You will be successful and you will be victorious because God is worthy of that commitment in you. You will never outgive God. You will never sacrifice more than God is going to give to you. You see, the reason why it's wise to make God worth everything in your life, the reason why it's wise to put God at the top, the reason why it's wise to give everything else up in order to get Him is because there is no amount that you could possibly give to Him that you will not receive more back. Why? Because He is faithful. If God is giving everything He has and you are required to give everything you have, who is coming out better in that deal? Is there anything that you can give? Is there any sacrifice that you could make? Is there anything that can be taken from you in this life that you will not receive back 100-fold more from God? And so we invest ourselves in covenants. And that investment goes to God first, and then it starts to spread out. Because our lives are full of covenants. Our lives are full of covenants. Everywhere that we go, we will find that there will be covenants as a part of who we are. Jesus shows this investment in others when He spends His life, His ministry with His disciples. In John chapter 16, starting verse 12 through 15, it says, "I still have many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now." Jesus is here at the end of His life, and He's been talking about His unity with the Father and how He wants to bring the disciples into that unity. What an amazing thing to think that that the love that exists between the Father and the Son that has existed for all eternity, that you can be brought into that. What an amazing thing. Is there anything in your life that's not worth that? And the disciples start to understand that maybe things are getting to the end. And Jesus can't say everything that He needs to say. And so He says, "I still have many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. When the Spirit of truth comes, He will guide you into all the truth, for He will not speak on His own authority, but whatever He hears, He will speak, and He will declare to you the things that are to come." So you notice something here, that Jesus is going to send the Spirit, and what is the Spirit going to do? Speak whatever it wants to speak? No, the Spirit is only going to speak what He hears. Why? Because the Spirit, there's a covenant relationship within the triune God itself. Jesus will only do what He sees His Father doing. The Spirit will only speak what He hears to speak. And He will declare to you the things that are to come. He will glorify Me, for He will take what is mine and declare it to you. All that the Father has is mine. Therefore I said that He will take what is mine and declare it to you. Do you see the power of covenant there? Everything that the Father has, He gives to the Son. Everything that the Son has, He gives to the Spirit. Everything that the Spirit has, He gives to you. It is the only sure foundation for your life. It is the only sure foundation for the relationships that you engage in. That you have entered into a covenant relationship with God, and now from there, you enter in appropriately to covenant relationships with the people that come into your life. The question for us here is, do we live like everything the Father has is ours? That passage clearly teaches that everything the Father has, He gives to the Son. Everything the Son has, He gives to the Spirit to give to us. Do we live as if that's true? Are you living right now as if that's true? That nothing can assail you because you're in a covenant relationship with the Father. And so if this life requires of you everything, if the ups and downs, the vicissitudes of this life, if they take from you everything you have, can you still have joy in the fact that everything the Father has is yours? Do you live confidently? Do you live boldly? Do you live victoriously? Because everything the Father has is yours. Well, let's finally talk about a life of covenant. Because when we enter into a covenant with God and He gives us everything He has, we have more than we need. What do we do with it? What do we do with all that we have? we give it to other people. You see, the interesting thing is we're now placed into this wonderful hierarchy where we have a covenant with God, and that overflows into a covenant with one another, and then that overflows with a covenant with all things. There is a joyful life that God has for us that's intended to be found in this covenant with Him. When we have everything that the Father has, when we have certainty, when we have surety of that, when we know that that's true beyond a doubt, then we will have joy in this life, and that joy will overflow into generosity with others. The question is this: when you have covenant relationships with people, are you all for them? Because God is all for you. If you have a wife, if you have a husband, are you all for each other because God is all for you? You have a congregation. Are we all for each other because God is all for us? You have a number of covenants that exist at different levels in your life. Do you live them fully? Are they the foundation for the relationships that you have? You see, because there's a lot of foundation for relationships, and most of them aren't good. I was watching something this week about South Africa, and I was listening to an interview with a guy who was hired to be the head of the national power company, the national electric company in South Africa. And South Africa right now is on the verge of collapse. It's having a terrible problem with, especially with its electrical infrastructure. There's rolling blackouts, and they say that if the power grid goes down completely in South Africa, it will take 2 weeks just to restart it. That's just the restart procedure. That's not repairing anything. It'll take 2 weeks just to restart it. Very few people in South Africa have the means to have 2 weeks' worth of supplies without electricity. It will be a disaster. And in the midst of this, the guy that was the president he had been appointed president of the power company, he had resigned. Well, you might say, well, why did he do such a thing? Well, because somebody poisoned him and almost killed him. Well, why would somebody poison the head of the power company? Because he was trying to get rid of the corruption in the power company. He said that within the coal section of the power company, there were at least 4 organized crime units operating. And that he estimated that the daily amount of fraud that was going on was at least $81 million. He talked about how employees of the power company would be paid by vendors to go in and destroy equipment so that the vendors would then get paid to go in and replace the equipment. And so they had put in these artificial intelligence cameras everywhere that they could at a great cost. And that sometimes these cameras would just mysteriously go down. And when these cameras mysteriously went down, then all of a sudden they'd find broken pieces all over their infrastructure. You see, the problem is that what he found is you can't make a fraud-proof organization. That if betrayal is in the hearts of men, there's nothing that you can do to stop it. And when he tried and did as much as he could to stop the corruption, and he was able to put a bit of a damper on it, the way that the organized crime elements within that industry retaliated is by poisoning him and almost killing him. Faced with a job that he had no hope of doing, he resigned. You see, every group of people has a level of covenant. You have a covenant within your family. You first have a covenant within your marriage. Then you have a covenant within your family. Then you have a covenant within your community. You have a covenant with your congregation. Then you have a covenant within your state. You have a covenant within your nation. You guys, we live connected to each other. And when we try to seek our own good outside of that, we destroy our own house. You see, here's the ultimate takeaway. that the only firm foundation is to live in covenant with God. And that gives you the blessing to live in covenant with others. To seek your blessing outside of the covenant is to tear down and destroy your own house, to tear down and destroy your own life. And so joyfully enter into the covenant. Why? Because life is bigger when we're connected to other people. Your life will grow, your blessing will grow, your life will grow, your house will be built when you enter into a covenant with God and then from there with other people. Ephesians 3:16-19 says that according to the riches of His glory, He may grant you to be strengthened with power through His Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all of the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. That is the description of Christ's covenant with us, that He is filling us with everything that He is. That everything that the Father has, He has given to the Son. Everything that the Son has, He has given to us through the Spirit. That He is filling us with everything He has. And that your life is expanded and grown when you enter into that covenant and then let that spill out to other people. It is the foundation for every relationship you have. So how do we apply this? Well, first of all, understand that His riches are for you. All of the riches of God are for you. And we have to come to believe that. We have to enumerate those. We have to understand them. We have to study those riches and understand that they are for us. And that in return we are for Him. We have to belong to Him through the covenant. We have to be united in obedience. If we're all for Him, that means that we obey Him. Not out of a sense of obligation, but out of a sense of blessing, out of a sense of love, out of a sense of joy. There can be nothing greater than to live in obedience to Him. And finally, we need to become glorious by being transformed to His goal of glory for us. God wants to glorify us. He wants us in a covenant with Him because He wants to bless us. He wants to glorify us. So we have our weekly opportunities through our conversations with God and our conversations about God for us to spend time with Him as a congregation. We invite you to look those up on our Facebook page, on our YouTube page, on our website, and to spend some time this week. Because why? Because there is no other foundation that will get you through your life.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow us on our Facebook page where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out all of our past lessons and other videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to His church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at www.fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Have a great week.